So hi everyone, I'm so sorry for the delay. We have a lot more people now. We can start this off. So just to give you an introduction, I'm Arnav Ghadge. I'm a business analyst at miniOrange, and I'll be your host for today. I could not be more excited to share the most significant update we've ever made for Atlassian Cloud. I'm also thrilled to introduce Shraddha Kamble, a senior software engineer at miniOrange. We will be demonstrating this product to you in detail during this webinar. So firstly, a bit of housekeeping before we get going. Please feel free to ask me any questions you have in the Q&A section throughout the presentation. No matter which region of the world you're in, we'll be responding to your questions as and when they come in. Additionally, Shraddha and I will also be hosting a live Q&A at the end of this webinar, and we'll be happy to take any questions then. So here's the agenda for today. We'll be covering quite a few topics actually. To start with, we'll be covering what Atlassian Access SSO is. We'll just give you a brief. What advanced SAML SSO functionalities miniOrange will be providing. Our out-of-box SSO for OAuth and OIDC applications. And also how single sign-on and 2FA can work together. Stay until the end because we have a very interesting offer for you. So before we get into advanced single sign-on functionalities, let me give you a brief about Atlassian Access. Atlassian Access is basically a module which is available for Atlassian Cloud, having functionalities like single sign-on for SAML providers and also 2FA. The catch here is that you can either enable SSO or 2FA for your cloud application, which means that enabling both at the same time will not be possible. I'll just explain this diagram to you. So this is how Atlassian Access, the flow of Atlassian Access works. So if a user wants to log in or access any of the Jira tickets or Confluence pages or any documents in it, Atlassian Access only supports SAML protocols. So it will only allow users to authenticate against the identity providers which support SAML, namely Okta, Azure AD, OneLogin, or Google. Since all the IDPs also support SAML protocol, like I said, single sign-on becomes possible only then. Moving on to the next slide, this is how the actual flow works of Atlassian Access. So as I mentioned in the previous example as well, Atlassian Access can only be connected with any of the IDPs using SAML. So when a user wants to log into Jira or Confluence or any other Atlassian application, the user needs to be validated first, right? So Atlassian will send a SAML request to the IDP to confirm the identity of the user as the user is stored in the IDP. Once the IDP successfully authenticates the user, it sends back the SAML response to Atlassian Access with the user information, and then the user is logged in. So before we proceed, it's just a quick question for you here. I'd like to ask you which identity providers are you currently using? There'll be a poll that's now visible on your screen. For those of you who don't see your IDPs, you can just send in your IDP name in the Q&A section. So I'll just wait for a minute for all your responses to come in. You can see people voting for Okta, Azure AD. So it seems like Azure AD is used the most. Okay, thanks for your responses, everyone. So now let's look at what Atlassian Access has to offer. So one of the very basic things is Atlassian Access has single IDP support. Along with that, it also has pre-integrations with a few identity providers. It also supports basic user provisioning as well. For example, you can only sync your first name, last name, and email addresses. Uh, Now, Shraddha is going to talk about the most important aspects about single sign-on. Over to you, Shraddha.
Thank you, Arnav. Hi, everyone. So we already learned a bit about Atlassian Access. Let's talk about what else is important in terms of single sign-on. We are first going to look at user profile attributes and how it simplifies user management for the Atlassian Cloud. So there are a couple of flows which we'll be achieving with the help of user profile attributes. You can fetch extra information like phone number, department name, or user roles to define permissions for accessing Atlassian Cloud. Fetching primary and secondary email addresses and to be able to log in with the pre-@@ part of it. Ability to log in using employee ID and so on. With Atlassian Access, since only email, first name and last name can be retrieved, the above are not possible. miniOrange SSO aims to make this possible for our customers. So now, apart from user profile attributes, we also want to touch upon how single IDP setup could be limited in a complex organization structure. So let's look at a couple of flows you can achieve from multiple IDP setup. With an IDP like Azure AD, where you can have multiple directories in place, you might want all of your users to log in using those directories and have access for Atlassian Cloud for Jira software or Confluence applications. With an IDP like Keycloak, users are stored under multiple realms. Each realm in Keycloak has unique users and permissions, and you want all of these users to be able to log in into Atlassian Cloud and have access for Jira tickets or Confluence pages. Currently, Atlassian Access only allows one directory or one realm at a time. So, logging through multiple directories or multiple realms cannot be achieved using Atlassian Access. So, where miniOrange comes in. Now, let's look at some advanced SAML SSO use cases that you can achieve using miniOrange. Let's say you have identities in multiple identity providers or user stores. You wish to be able to connect not just Atlassian applications, but all of your applications with multiple identity providers where user identities are stored. This requires some sort of a broker service which can authenticate from any identity provider and log the user in to the necessary applications. miniOrange Identity Provider provides such a service where you can connect multiple IDPs to multiple service providers, irrespective of their protocols. In context with Atlassian Access, this builds and simplifies the trust up between Atlassian Cloud and your identity providers. Now, let's look at how all of this works. Here, you can see we have Atlassian Cloud application with Atlassian Access on top of. On one side and on the other, you can see identity provider. We have miniOrange in between, which acts as a bridge for connecting these two applications. When a user tries to log in or when a user tries to access Atlassian Cloud, it sends a request to miniOrange instead of sending it to your identity provider. miniOrange then creates and passes on a request of its own to the identity provider. Now, identity provider processes and sends the response back to miniOrange along with user-specific information. miniOrange now processes the response and generates its own response from the Atlassian Cloud, and Atlassian Cloud finally reads the response and logs the user in. I hope the flow is clear. Let's talk about popular SAML SSO use case. Over to you, Arnav.
Thank you, Shraddha. So I'll be covering a few popular SAML SSO use cases. So first, fetching additional attributes like phone number, roles, and user permissions from IDP and allowing them to get logged into Atlassian Cloud is one very popular use case which we see in quite a few enterprises and organizations. Similarly, integrating multiple identity providers with Atlassian Access for user login. Let's say that you have two IDPs and you want to configure both of them for SSO. That's also possible. You can also use domain-based or directory-based user login. And finally, you can extract the exact username from an email or any other attribute for login using our regex feature. So I'll just ask you a quick question here again. Which of these requirements align with your organization? I'll just start the poll now, and you can just select one of the options from the poll, which will show up on your screen. I'll just wait for a minute here for you to respond. Okay, so thank you for your responses. I can see a lot of votes coming in. So it's good to know that these use cases are at least aligned with your organization. So now Shraddha will be explaining the use cases in detail. You, Shraddha.
Yes, thank you, Arnav. Let's look at those popular use cases in more detail now. I believe the first use case was to fetch additional attributes like phone number, roles, or user permission during login and apply some custom login rules during the login process and then let user access Jira software or Jira service desk on the cloud. When a user tries to access Atlassian Cloud, it sends a request to miniOrange. miniOrange then creates and passes on a request of its own to the identity provider. Now, identity provider processes and sends miniOrange a response with some additional profile attributes. miniOrange processes the response and applies admin-defined login rules like employee ID mapping, primary and secondary email address mapping, group or role restrictions, and a lot more. miniOrange, based on the login rules, generates and sends its own response to the Atlassian Access. Atlassian Access reads the response and logs the user in. Let's look at the second use case, where we will be connecting multiple identity providers with Atlassian Access. As before, Atlassian Access will send a login request to miniOrange. Now, instead of miniOrange sending another request directly to one identity provider, users will be prompted to choose an identity provider for login. Based on their choice, user would be redirected to their respective identity provider for authentication. And on successful authentication, the identity provider would send back the SAML response to miniOrange. Now, miniOrange will process the response and generates its own response for the Atlassian Cloud. Atlassian Cloud would read the login and would read the response and let the user log in. For accessing the Atlassian applications such as Jira software and Confluence. I hope you understood how multiple IDP flow works. In addition to this, I'm sure now you are well aware of this flow where the request goes through miniOrange to log in the user to Atlassian Cloud. Looking at the third use case with miniOrange, we'll be able to enforce few rules based on the domain, IDP of a user, or a specific user attribute. Let's take an example where Okta is mapped to miniOrange. email domain, and AWS to securify email domain. When a user with a miniOrange email address tries to log in, the user will be redirected to Okta for authentication. Similarly, if the user wants to log in with securify email address, then the user will be redirected to AWS Cognito for further authentication process. This is domain-based identity provider mapping. Yeah. Over to you, Arnav.
Yes, so Riva, the flow here, I'll be explaining username transformation for login. So the flow here is actually pretty similar to what you've seen before. So there's miniOrange, which comes in between Atlassian Cloud and your IDP. So let me give you a good example here. Let's say you have a use case wherein your username in your IDP and your Atlassian Cloud is different, right? Then what do? As the username does not match, Atlassian Access will not pick up or sync the user. So once miniOrange comes in between, it will reprocess and restructure the email according to the requirement and then send it to Atlassian Access for login. So eventually, then after this process is complete, the user will get logged in. So moving on to the next slide, I'll be explaining what OAuth and OIDC SSO is for Atlassian Cloud and how miniOrange solution is able to achieve this. So as mentioned earlier, here also a similar miniOrange identity brokering platform is used. So as mentioned earlier, Atlassian Access only supports SAML, right? And so how do enterprises having OAuth or OIDC identity providers use single sign-on? miniOrange Identity Broker provides a cross-platform communication. To explain this, imagine a translator where the translator listens to one language from one side and speaks to the other one in an understandable way. Similarly, here you have two applications speaking in two entirely different SSO protocols like SAML and OAuth speak to each other through the miniOrange identity broker acting as a translator. Now, Shraddha will explain some popular use cases for OAuth and OIDC SSO.
Right. So as we know, Atlassian Access only supports SAML-based SSO authentication. Let's look at how miniOrange helps you connect your Atlassian Cloud applications with your Auth or OpenID providers. Atlassian Access would send a SAML request to miniOrange. miniOrange will translate the request from SAML to an Auth or OpenID request. miniOrange sends the modified request to your provider. After successful authentication from your provider, that is Auth or OpenID, the response is sent back to miniOrange. Now miniOrange reads and parses the response into a SAML format, which is understandable to Atlassian Access. The generated SAML response is then sent back to Atlassian Access with all the attributes from the provider. Atlassian Access reads the response and then logs the user in. Right. So all the use cases that we touched upon before with SAML IDPs are fetching additional attributes, supporting multiple identity providers for login, allowing your users to log in based on unique attributes such as domain, groups, and so on, extracting username during login, are all supported in the Auth and OpenID provider as well. We looked at different SSO use case. So now let's look at some two-factor authentication use cases and how we can connect SSO and use cases together. Like we discussed in the beginning about Atlassian Access supporting only either SSO or 2FA at a time. This setup assumes that you have the option to turn on 2FA for your organization. For a new IDPs like ADFS, Keycloak, which don't have 2FA support by default, you can use miniOrange to invoke two-factor authentication there. We also provide support for additional authentication methods such as OTP over email, OTP over SMS, hardware token, software token, and many more. Even though 2FA is supported through miniOrange, you can brand and customize the login pop-up to make the 2FA experience look seamless. So here is the SSO flow, which goes through miniOrange identity provider. After miniOrange receives the response from IDP, it invokes two-factor authentication on the miniOrange side. So on miniOrange side, the response is verified along with 2FA. Here, you can see a pop-up to enter the OTP for the configured method. Then it forms a method, then it forms a response, and then the response sent back to Atlassian Access for further user login. Okay, so now we have seen a couple of use cases. So let's start with the demo. The prerequisites for demo would be to have an Atlassian Access subscription. And yeah, along with Atlassian subscription, you need to have a valid miniOrange account so you can access the dashboard and perform related SSO related settings. Along with this, you also need to sync all of your users into miniOrange for processing user related operations. So just let me share my screen to start with the demo. So here, as you can see, as we discussed that miniOrange, the Atlassian Access will be connecting to miniOrange, and then miniOrange will be responsible for sending or receiving a response back from the identity provider. So let's take an example of Okta as an identity provider, and let's see a demo where how we can connect it with Okta and try to log in the user. So this is Atlassian Access. To see Atlassian Access SSO setting, you just have to go to security under the admin prompt. Then you can see SAML single sign-on option. And here you can do the SSO related configuration. At the same time, we have to connect Atlassian Access with miniOrange. So using the application here. So you can see the connection is happening using SAML protocol. In addition to this, we can have identity providers. Let's suppose we are using Okta as an identity provider. So I will set Okta as default identity provider for login. And once that is done, I'll have to create a user in miniOrange. So let's see, I want to perform SSO for shraddha@miniorange.com. Once that is defined in miniOrange, I'll have to make the same set of change on the Atlassian Access also. So for that, I have to create an authentication policy. To do that, click on Add Policy, entering policy name, and then there you go. Here, you can see option for enabling or enforcing single sign-on along with two-factor authentication. So once enforce single sign-on option is enabled, the 2FA can only be set up on the IDP level. So let's save the setting now. Okay, so let me try to access the admin dashboard of Atlassian. I'm using the same user which I have created in miniOrange. Okay, so now it is asking me for password. The reason behind this is I haven't mentioned the members or the users which should be use SSO for login. So let me do that first. Okay, so now user has been added. you can see the count has increased to 1. So let's go back to the login screen. I have entered the same email address here. And now it should redirect it to Okta. Right. So we got Okta screen for further login process. Simply entering username password should allow me to have access for Atlassian Cloud application. Yes, I'm in. If you want to see, then under profile, you can see the same email address which I have used for login. So this says that we have a successful SSO connection in between Atlassian Access and Okta with the help of miniOrange token. Now, let's see few more use cases. So now let's take an example of multiple identity providers. So what I have to do here, I have mentioned that Okta should be used at default IDP every time. So if I am going to continue with the same setting, I won't be able to access AWS Cognito here. So to make that happen, I have to make the miniOrange as default source of authentication. So now here you can see AWS Cognito, but wait, I see something else here. Atlassian Access supports SAML, but I could see auth authentication or IDP type here. So how that can be done or how that works? So what we have done, we have created an identity provider in miniOrange which supports AWS Cognito. Do you remember the conversation when Arnav mentioned about using miniOrange as a translator? So yes, here it implies. So we have connected AWS Cognito even if it supports auth or OIDC provider, and we have done a couple of configuration here. So let's see how that works now. I just want to add one more point here, like in addition to having two identity provider here, I have also made few branding changes. Can you see the organization name here? So miniOrange gives you a platform or a provision where you can customize all the login pages and make it look like your organization. I have also changed the button color and a few more changes in here and there. Okay, now let's see how the login for multiple IDP works. I'm entering the email address which is configured on the Atlassian side, Atlassian Access. Oh, wow. So I can see two buttons here which says Okta and AWS Cognito. So I can use any of these buttons for the SSO purpose. If I want to log in using AWS Cognito, then I'll click that and it will redirect me to AWS Cognito login page. Here, the simple thing would be to enter email, username and password. That's it. Right, I'm in. So if you check the profile, you can find the email address. So you are seeing the same email address during Okta's login as well as during AWS login because I have kept it the same for both the identity providers and which is also mentioned under members in Atlassian Access. Hope you're clear about this. Or you can drop comments or questions on the Q&A box. Okay, now let's see the next use case, which is domain mapping. So for domain mapping, as we explained in the slides, Okta can be mapped with miniOrange.com domain, and similarly AWS can be mapped with different domain, which is securify.com here. All right. So what will happen if a user with miniOrange.com comes in, the miniOrange will redirect that user directly to Okta. And if a user with Securify domain comes in, then the user will be redirected to AWS. It's as simple as that. They are just working on the configured domain mapping. Okay, so let me just enter the miniOrange.com. So according to the mapping which we have done on the miniOrange side, this should redirect this user to Okta by default. But wait, how that is possible? We have written the rule of redirecting Okta, redirecting miniOrange.com user to Okta. So we'll have to add the email address in here because the mapping is written on the miniOrange side and not at the Atlassian side. So when I click on login, it should send me to Okta's login page. Yeah. And then simply entering username and password and then logging in should work here. Okay. Now, let's see how SSO and 2FA can work. But before that, I want to show you something. Let me just clear out the domain settings, which we have done. Okay. So, before starting SSO and 2FA, I just want to stretch more on this part. So as you know, we have enforced single sign-on on Atlassian Access, and here the option of 2FA got totally disabled, and it wants you to enable the two-factor authentication on the IDP side. But what if I disable user login? Will the 2FA still work? Yes. So here you can see after disabling enforced single sign-on, I got to see few of the options of two-factor authentication. Yeah. So I can do a couple of settings in here, and then this will help me to use two-factor authentication on top of normal username and password login. But there is a catch. If you want to use OTP or SMS as a verification method, so you won't be able to do that because Atlassian only supports mobile authenticator. So what are we going to do next? So on the miniOrange side, you just have to go to two-factor authentication and just click on setup 2FA. Here you can see a way to enable two-factor authentication for your account. Once you enable that, you can see a couple of methods like OTP over SMS, OTP, SMS over link, SMS, OTP over SMS as well as email, and few more like authenticator apps, miniOrange authenticator. miniOrange has its own authenticator as well. Hardware token, backup questions, backup method like a security questions and so on. So let's do one thing for now. Let me go with OTP or SMS here. And in addition to this, I have to make one more policy change, which is right now, till now, I was logging or I was authenticating using username and password. All because of this, because I have selected my login method as password. Now I want to do password as well as 2FA. So I'll be selecting this, which is enable 2FA along with login method as password. So yes, so this is done. We have also set up 2FA for OTP using OTP over SMS method. Okay. So now let me quickly do one thing. I will keep Okta as a default for 2FA. Okay. So when you come to Atlassian login page, it should redirect to Okta, as we made Okta as default authenticator for login. And now I should see a pop-up for OTP verification. Yes. So I can see a pop-up and there's a message that the OTP has been sent to this email. So it's the same email. If you can relate, it's the same email which we have added as member on the Atlassian side. Okay. Now let me just quickly fetch the OTP from the mobile device. So I am able to get the OTP on my device. And now if I click on OTP verification, then it should, yes. So now I can access the Atlassian dashboard using 2FA plus two-factor authentication with the help of OTP over email method. You can see the email here. Yeah, over to you, Anav.
Yeah. Thank you, Shraddha. So this brings us to the end of our presentation. I hope you've understood the advanced SSO features and 2FA features that miniOrange provides. Thank you so much for the interest you've shown. Our team is always striving to make new apps and support new use cases. We have a few cloud solutions on the marketplace already, as you can see on your screen. We also have a lot more solutions coming up in the next few weeks, so you can stay tuned, and you can always follow us on LinkedIn or at miniOrange INC to stay up to date with the news. And since you waited throughout this webinar, we have a small gift for you. So as a token of our appreciation, if you purchase any of our cloud apps in the Atlassian marketplace in the next 7 days, you're eligible for all these 3 offers. Sounds exciting, right? So again, thank you for joining us, and you can visit our website on miniorange.com/Atlassian, or reach out to us at atlassiansupport@securify.com for any queries or any use case that you'd like us to cover. Now I'll be answering a few questions in the Q&A that came up during the webinar. So the first question here is actually a very interesting question. Is Atlassian Access necessary for your solution? So Shraddha, would you like to answer this?
Sure. So yes, Atlassian Access is required for the miniOrange solution, as the basic authentication part is handled to Atlassian Access due to limited APIs for cloud. So basically, what Atlassian did is they have disabled or restricted all the session creation APIs, due to which the end-to-end SSO model cannot be implemented. And that's why miniOrange supports, or miniOrange has advanced SSO features which can work on top of Atlassian Access.
The next question that we'll be taking is, I have users in Keycloak, and Keycloak supports SAML as well as OAuth. So how should I set it up?
This is really a good question. So if IDP already has a support for 2FA, then going with miniOrange will be beneficial for them, because miniOrange has a lot of methods. They can use multiple primary methods along with backup code. So if the phone or if any other method is not working due to some reason, then they always have an option of backup methods. So this is one. Plus, there are multiple IDPs, the popular IDPs like Keycloak, ADFS, or Shibboleth, which does not have support for 2FA by default. So for those sort of IDPs, also miniOrange provides two-factor authentication solution, and which can work on top of SSO as well. Good question.
Shraddha, the next question is, so users have to enter their email address twice. Can you explain this?
Right. So do you remember where we have added the member for login, right? So the pop-up which Atlassian shows is just to verify if the user has marked under single sign-on, or user should get login with just username password, which is stored on Atlassian Cloud side. So this is the reason Atlassian shows a screen or login screen where we need to enter the email address. In addition to this, once Atlassian Access or Atlassian Cloud verifies if the user belongs to the single sign-on or has enabled single sign-on authentication, the request directly sends to the IDP. There is a way where we can bypass this. In miniOrange, we provide a direct SSO link. So you just have to click on that link, and the user will get directly redirected to the IDP's login page. In that case, you can bypass the bypass the Atlassian Access login page. I hope this answers your question.
So the next question is, if the user is not added under members, can he still perform SSO?
Unfortunately, the SSO will not work because because Atlassian Access allows users to perform SSO only if they are added as a member. Basically, the SSO works only for existing users which are created on the Atlassian Cloud side. Any new user who wants to perform SSO needs to be added first on the Atlassian Cloud, and then only the user can perform login.
This is another good question. We are using your SSO for server. We are moving to the cloud in the next months. Will you provide support for migration?
Yes, definitely. We'll provide the support for migration. There are few plugins we have which will help you migrate from server to cloud.
Yes, so like Shraddha said, we know that this migration can be quite tedious. So you will have a dedicated member of our technical team to assist you during your migration. The next question is, do you provide customized solutions for cloud SSO? Like if I want to log in using VPN?
Yes, we do provide customized solution for cloud SSO as well, where you can use VPN or any private network for login. So it is pretty possible. We have a lot of customized solution. Even if we have already provided a few customized solution for our cloud customers where they wanted to perform login either based on domain or you based on primary and secondary email addresses. So pretty much it is possible. If it is possible for you, then can you please share the detailed information in the Q&A section so that we can discuss it a bit more?
Yes, and there's a last question that can we use multiple 2FA methods at the same time?
Yes, miniOrange has a provision where you can set up multiple methods at the same time and use all of them as primary, secondary, and backup methods. Same, you can receive for authentication, you can receive OTP on email as well as on mobile device on SMS at the same time. So yes, it works.
I think thank you, Shraddha, for answering all the questions in detail. And if there are any more questions, you can always reach out to us through our website or our help desk or at atlassiansupport@securify.com. Thank you. It was great presenting this webinar to you, and stay tuned for our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining. We will be sending you a few offers, so stay tuned. Thank you.
That reminds me, we'll also be sending you details about what we've spoken about in this webinar and our solutions, the presentation as well. So if there's anything that you didn't quite get clear, so then you can always have a look at that.